Hello, everyone. This is Wayne Callan for ADDitude magazine. Glad you can be with us. So the school year is winding down, or is over for some of you. It's probably not an understatement to say that it was long and tough, with the IEP meetings and homework challenges, social skills challenges, and meltdowns that may have occurred, yours and your child's. Parents approach the summer break in a couple of ways. Either they feel their child deserves a break from the rigors of school and should chill out, spread his or her wings, and have fun. Other parents are worried that their child will slide academically, so they have a regular regimen of academics during the summer. Reading every day, which I think is always a good idea, math facts, and so on. Perhaps the best bet is to have a measured approach, some routine and structure, and some fun. The fact is, children with ADHD do best with structure, plenty of it. Talking with your child, you can work to establish schedules and goals for the summer that includes fun and relaxation. We are pleased to have Sarah Tannenbaum to walk us through how to create those schedules and goals and to find a balanced approach to the summer. Sarah is an Associate Director of the Summer Enrichment Institute at Judge Baker Children's Center, which is affiliated with Harvard Medical School, and a staff psychologist at the Center for Effective Child Therapy at Judge Baker Children's Center. Dr. Tannenbaum has extensive experience delivering evidence-based treatments to caregivers and children ages 3 to 18 years old in individual, group, family, and parent-only formats. For today, Sarah will give an in-depth presentation about the topic, and then she will take your questions. If you're new to our webinars, post your questions for Sarah in the box at the right on your screen. You can also download today's slides from the control panel at the right of your screen. So with all that being said, I'll turn it over to Sarah now. Sarah, it's great to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Wayne, for having me as well. ADDitude is a very well-read resource for many of the parents of the families that I work with and see here at Judge Baker. So I'm really excited to be a part of this today. As you mentioned, the summer is a time that we all think about as a time for fun, a time to de-stress, relax, take it easy, and take a break. And I think that's true for us as adults, but also true for our children. You know, we know how hard our kids work throughout the school day to hold it together, to manage their behavior, to stay focused, and to pay attention. And so we really want them to have that time to relax and unwind during the summer, knowing how hard they work throughout the school year. But keeping that in mind, a lot of times my office is the busiest during the summer or during summer vacation, during spring vacation, winter vacation, holidays, because we often see that our kids really, really struggle during the unstructured times. They struggle for a number of reasons. You know, as you mentioned, a lot of our kids with ADHD are on IEPs or they might be on 504 plans. Those plans are really set up to allow our kids to be successful, and they have a whole host of different providers to help them be successful. If you have a child on an IEP, they often have support from school psychologists or guidance counselors. They might be pulled out for smaller classroom instruction or group-based learning. They might even have their own aids located in the classroom to help them learn. For instance, maybe reading questions to them so they only have to attend to one thing at a time. They also might have support from occupational therapists or speech and language therapists and all different activities after school or during school to really help them get their energy out, keep their day varied, and keep them motivated and engaged in what they're doing. We want to think about how we can maintain that same sort of structured environment that allows our kids to be successful while also allowing them to have fun. If those supports are requisite during the school year for them to have success and make effective progress academically or with peers or with adults, then to just remove them over the summer or during unstructured periods of time is really going to set our kids up for a less than successful time. However, because most kids receive mental health treatment and support within the school system, we often don't see kids in treatment during the summer. A lot of the kids who I see on a weekly basis, they take the summer off, they might take medication holidays. So not only are they not getting the supports that are mandated or provided within their schools, they're also not getting the supports of many of the adults within their lives. We also know that for kids with ADHD, there's something called the summer slide. And that's when kids over the summer regress academically, socially, and behaviorally. And that's because our kids with ADHD work so hard to maintain their focus, their attention, keep control over their bodies throughout the school year with all those supports, that when those come off over the summer, it's like taking off training wheels on a bike before a child's really mastered how to balance on a bike, right? And so we see them fall back because they haven't yet mastered the skill independently. We can also see that social challenges really manifest over the summer when those supports don't take place. If you have a child who participates in a lunch bunch activity where there's a staff member at school who's helping them navigate conversations with peers and helping them figure out what's appropriate, how to respond, what to say to their peers, how to make effective eye contact, and then you throw a kid into a camp program with 30 other kids, many of whom probably don't have ADHD, that's rife for real difficulties for our children. Kids with ADHD also have high rates of co-occurring learning disabilities or other academic struggles. So they're working so hard throughout the school year to stay on top of their grades, stay on top of their coursework, complete their work, that when the summer comes and we take all that work away, a lot of times they just completely forget about what it was that they learned, right? And then they're starting the school year behind. And for our kids with ADHD, starting the school year behind is a really significant challenge because attention and focus is so hard for them already. They can already be forgetful, they can lose things or misplace things, they can be messy or disorganized. So if they're starting off behind, they're starting out with a real disadvantage because our kids with ADHD are not as well equipped to catch up. So we want them sort of starting the school year in September ahead of the game so that they don't have to catch up, because that repetition is really important for our kids with ADHD and will allow them to have success and to build on that success rather than starting behind and then oftentimes feeling like there's nothing they can do to catch up. So why even bother trying? So the summer is really, really a time when, although our kids want to have a lot of fun and are often very active and enjoy lots of outside activities, we want to make sure that we're still implementing the supports and structures that we know work during the school year so that they can have a good time during the summer. So we sort of want to reframe how we think about structure rather than it being something negative, it being something that's requisite for kids to have a fun time and to be successful, and teaching our kids with ADHD that that's really how their brains work best. And it's a life tool that they need to learn now at a young age so that they can continue to advocate and implement structure for themselves. I'm just going to briefly talk about some of the ways that we see difficulties manifest for children with ADHD, and for parents of kids with ADHD, these should be very familiar. So in school, our kids with ADHD often get into trouble with teachers, and they often get into trouble with peers. We think about kids with ADHD as being particularly good at getting a lot of negative attention. Right? They're really good at getting attention when they forget to turn in their homework or schoolwork. Maybe they just didn't do it. Maybe it's in their bag, but they can't find it because their bag is so messy. Or maybe they left their bag at home this morning and it just never made it to school. They also get easily distracted, and that can be really frustrating for teachers who are trying to present academic material. It can also get really frustrating for friends who are trying to pay attention. So our kids with ADHD often get a reputation as being class clowns or as taking away from the material that's presented in school. They're also very good at escaping or avoiding school demands. When they get all this negative attention, the number one way that schools typically respond to kids who are acting out or getting out of their chair or walking around the classroom is to send them to an office. Maybe it's the principal's office, the guidance counselor's office, or another room. And while that does take away the problem for the teacher and for many of the kids in the class, what we actually do is we reinforce the child's acting out behavior. Because if they're feeling insecure about their ability to participate effectively in the classroom, then when they get asked to leave the classroom, all of a sudden our kids with ADHD feel an immense amount of relief. Now they don't have to be there anymore. They don't have to pay attention. They don't have to worry about holding it together. So they become really skilled at escaping or avoiding demands from school environments. Our kids with ADHD also have really significant social skills difficulties. They're typically the kids who might get sought out by other kids to do something that kids sort of know isn't the right thing to do, but might seem a little silly or a little fun, because our kids with ADHD are often so impulsive that they don't think through what the consequences of their actions might be. So kids might say, you know, put a tack on another kid's seat and see if they'll step on it. And our kid with ADHD might say, that sounds so funny, and they might do it and then get in a lot of trouble. So they're really vulnerable to peer influences, especially from older kids. I hear about a lot of challenges on the school bus when kids are less monitored and supervised, and our kids with ADHD really being susceptible to influence from their peers. Kids with ADHD often also have a hard time in sports and competition. They might be really, really competitive or struggle when someone else scores a basket in basketball, or when their team loses a game, or if another player on their team isn't performing up to par. And that can really make it hard for them to sustain and form friendships. It's also hard for them if they're inattentive, because maybe one of their friends is telling them something and they totally missed 5 minutes of the conversation and have no idea what they're talking about. That's not the sort of peer interaction that most kids are looking for. Most kids want to know, my friend's really paying attention to me and they know what it is that's important to me and what I like. So our kids with ADHD, both the impulsive, hyperactive type and the inattentive type, have a really hard time navigating peer relationships. At home, as many of you know, kids with ADHD really struggle to follow directions, particularly the first time they're told. So parents often feel like broken records, just saying the same thing over and over and over again. And even for the most skilled parent, it's really hard to keep your cool and stay calm when you've told your kid to sit down and do their homework over and over and over again. Homework is also something that's very challenging for our kids with ADHD. When they're tasked with doing homework, oftentimes their medication has worn off. They've already worked so hard to hold it together throughout the day. And now we're saying, on top of everything you've already done at your 8-hour school day, or maybe even longer if they go to extended school, now you need to sit down and do homework or chores. We also know that all kids really enjoy screen time and think that screen time is a right that they have. So there can be lots of fights over screen time. There can be lots of fights about sitting down and eating, or about going to bed. And our kids with ADHD often present with lots of extra energy, which is really tough for parents, especially working parents or parents with lots of kids at home, to manage after your long days. And then when we think about camp and recreational activities, these are activities that are typically less structured than a school day, that often don't have mental health professionals or people who are trained to work with children with ADHD. And so a lot of times we have really high expectations for kids in recreational settings that just aren't really doable for our kids with ADHD. It's also often a time after school, again, when maybe medication has worn off or kids have worked really hard to hold it together all day. So our kids with ADHD might present as more emotional. They might have more behavioral challenges. And my kids often are coming to me after having been suspended multiple times or even expelled from programs. And that really feeds this negative feedback loop for our children with ADHD, where they start to feel like they're not good at anything. They can't even do sports well. They can't do friendships well. They can't do school well. Their parents get frustrated with them. And this begins a cycle of them really feeling down about themselves, having low self-esteem, and starting to avoid things that they really want to do or they think are really fun because they're worried about how they might act or the type of response they might get in different settings. So it can feel like a really bleak picture, both for kids with ADHD and for parents with ADHD, of kids with ADHD, excuse me. So we need to think about how to sort of restructure the environment to take that power back and to help teach kids with ADHD that their brains and bodies really need a different level of structure than most of their friends. And that structure doesn't have to be a bad thing, but actually is something that's really good and can be a lot of fun. We also want to make sure that summer is not a time of regression for our kids and that they can focus on getting ahead over the summer months. So we can really think about setting a few concrete goals in each area, in academics, socially, and behaviorally, so that we can see our kids making gains over the summer months rather than sliding behind and then playing catch up. We can still create a fun environment that fosters relaxation and calm and a little bit of a break while implementing skills and strategies that will set our kids with ADHD up for success. And we're really going to talk today about how to do that with your child so that you can be a team in setting up goals and schedules to allow them to be successful. Okay. So I'm going to talk to you today about 4 basic skills and strategies that are going to allow you to set up a successful summer for your child with ADHD and for you and all the adults and other children who might interact with your kids. These simple strategies on the surface seem to be things that you're probably already doing, that you've thought about. These are evidence-based strategies. And what that means is that these are skills and strategies that have been proven to work in science, studied over and over and over again. So we know that they work really, really well for our kids with ADHD. And you might feel like I'm already doing this or my school is already doing this. But to really make these skills work for your specific child takes a lot of thought and a lot of nuance and a lot of advocacy on your part. So even if you're doing these skills, with great fidelity, it's highly unlikely that all the adults who are interacting with your kid truly understand these principles. So we're going to talk about really how to tailor them for your kid. And I'm going to use 2 kids as examples. So my first child is going to be Johnny, who is an 11-year-old boy. He's a classic kid with a hyperactive type of ADHD, and he's going to a YMCA camp this summer. The camp is mostly staffed by high school kids who've never really worked with kids before, maybe went to the YMCA camp themselves, maybe they're counselors in training. And it's a pretty big camp setting, right? There's about 30 kids for every 2 counselors. They're active, but there's not a ton of structure throughout the day. And then I'm also going to talk about Susie, who is a classic example of an inattentive ADHD child. She's 10 years old, and this summer her parents wanted to give her a break, so she's staying home with a babysitter. And they want to make sure that she keeps up with some of her academics and extracurricular activities, but they don't want her to feel too burdened by having to do a lot of different things over the summer. All right, so the first skill that we're going to talk about is something called praise. And we're really going to talk about how to make praise the most effective. Right? And I like to use the light switch on metaphor when we think about praise, because again, our kids with ADHD are really, really good at getting negative attention from adults and negative attention from peers. So we want to think about shining a light on our kids when they're behaving well. And we want that light to be a super, super effervescent, bright light. We want to really catch them being good and preempt any behavior problems that might occur if we're not really focusing on what they're doing well. And we can do this well by providing high rates of effective praise and positive reinforcement, by really believing that there's nothing too small to celebrate in terms of praiseworthy behavior, and by using our attention, something that kids are highly, highly motivated by. They really want attention from adults and peers. So we're going to use that attention for good by increasing appropriate behavior and pro-social behavior, because that's what we're going to really pay attention to. In order to deliver effective praise, we want to think about giving labeled praise for behaviors. There's two main types of praise, labeled and unlabeled. And most of the times as grown-ups, we use unlabeled praise. So an example of unlabeled praise would be something like good job or thank you, which are totally fine things to say and often feel really nice to hear. But if I say, Johnny, good job, what is Johnny doing a good job at? He doesn't know because I didn't tell him. So it could be any number of things that he's doing a good job at. So for our kids with ADHD especially, we want to make sure we're really specific in what we praise so that the child knows what they do more of in order to get that adult attention again. So for example, we might want to say, Johnny, thank you for listening. Or I like when you make eye contact with me when I'm speaking. So that will really teach your child exactly what you want to see more of. And then they're going to do that more because they want that positive attention from you. We need to make it easier for them to get positive attention because we know that they're really, really good at getting negative attention. And again, we want to combat that low self-esteem that our kids with ADHD often have from all that negative attention. So we have to front load them with praise. So for Johnny, who is often hyperactive and running around and getting away from the rest of the group, we want to front load him with praise. Johnny, nice job staying in the activity. I like to see how calm your body is. So we really want to think about what are the specific things we want to see, and we want to pour on praise anytime that we see that. For Susie, it's going to be a little harder because she's inattentive. So she's not as good at getting that negative attention for big, explosive, or acting out behaviors. So we might want to ask Susie a question like, what was the last thing I said? And then say, Susie, nice job paying attention. I can tell you're paying attention because you repeated my words. So we really want to think about each specific child and the things that they typically struggle with and how we can praise the positive opposite. There's a term that we use called scaffolding, and that's really thinking about where the child currently is and where you want him or her to be. So for instance, if Johnny typically participates in an activity for about 10 minutes and then he loses his motivation and focus, maybe our first goal is that he starts to participate for 15 minutes. Sure, that's not the whole 60-minute activity, and we would like him to participate for the whole 60-minute activity, but that might be too much of an ask at first. So we might think, okay, as soon as we're getting to 9 or 10 minutes, when Johnny's attention typically starts to wax and wane and he gets a little more active and he starts to leave the group, we want to really pay attention in those minutes between 10 and 15 and say, Johnny, I love how you're still kicking the soccer ball. I can tell you're still participating. Thank you for remaining with the group, and really help him increase his participation from 10 to 15 minutes. And then slowly we'll get him to that 60-minute interval of full participation. We also want to think about applying praise really generously. So every parent comes in and says to me, of course I praise my kid. I praise my kid all the time. And that's probably really true. But the amount of praise that a child with ADHD needs to negate a negative statement is actually very, very high. We have to have 5 positive praise statements just to balance out 1 negative statement, because our brains are really hardwired to pay attention to the negative. And our kids with ADHD are getting so much negative that we really need to up the ante with the positive praise statements. So I challenge all the parents who are listening to actually maybe tally the number of statements that you say, or maybe that your babysitter says, or the teacher or camp counselor says, and see how you're doing with that ratio. And my guess is that you probably need to increase the frequency of those praise statements to balance out any of the don't do that or stop doing this statements that your kid probably hears a whole lot of. Instead of telling kids what not to do, we want to tell them what we want them to do. There's lots of different kinds of praise, and the praise that we find is the most effective is that natural sort of social reinforcement. Again, because kids are really motivated by attention from adults and peers, and we want them to be motivated by that. We just want to show them that they're capable of getting positive attention, because many of the kids that I see and many of the kids that you probably have at home are kids who are starting to think, I can't get positive attention from peers or from teachers. They just don't like me. Camp counselors don't like me. I'm no good at that activity. So we want to flip that notion on its head and teach them, in the right environment, you can be good at that activity. And we really want to label praise, and we want to pour on that natural social reinforcement. We can also apply praise by giving public recognition. So things like a best helper reward or a little badge to show the kid you're doing a really good job. Sometimes this is something that's built into classrooms or to camp activities, but it's something special that you could design with your child's camp program, or even if you have a sitter at home. Is there an award you can give your child for what they did yesterday to really highlight all their hard work? A little later, I'll talk more about point systems and home-based reward programs, and also about something called a daily report card. That's a really great way to praise kids and monitor behavior across settings, so kids know that we're watching and that what they do in one place is really going to matter in another setting as well. All right. So we talked about the light switch on and how we want to pay tons of attention when kids are doing a really good job and catch them doing well. What we also want to do is we want to turn that light switch off when we see behavior that we don't want to see. Okay. A lot of times, again, our kids with ADHD get the most attention when they're acting out and doing things that are inappropriate. And what that actually does is that makes that behavior happen more. It's a way that we inadvertently reinforce our kids' inappropriate behavior and then get into a really tough cycle with them where they continue to act out because the only way they know how to get attention is from acting out. So when we see bad behavior or behavior that's undesired or unwanted, we want to just remove our attention. And we can think about hard and soft ignores. So an example of a soft ignore for Johnny, who might be sitting at the dinner table and playing with his food, is just sort of turning your attention away and paying attention to his little brother, Ryan, who's eating really well, and saying, Ryan, I like how you're using your spoon and your fork to eat your dinner. And then as soon as Johnny picks up his fork, Johnny, thank you so much for picking up your fork. Right? We want to stick with our ignoring even when kids amp up their behavior. Oftentimes, when you start to think about ignoring a behavior, because it's something that you've paid attention to in the past, kids will amp it up. They'll start to notice, wait a minute, when I've thrown my food in the past, my parents always pay attention. So they'll try to get your attention by amping it up. But once you decide that you're going to ignore a behavior, you've got to stick with it and you've got to follow it through. And then as soon as the behavior that we don't want to see stops, you want to really return your attention. You want to turn that light switch back on and give lots of labeled praise for the positive opposite behavior. So again, if Johnny is throwing his food at the dinner table and you've turned your attention away to his younger brother and you're telling his younger brother what you like, as soon as he puts that fork down or as soon as he stops throwing his food, you're going to say, thank you for using your silverware the right way. I like your calm hands. So you're not paying any attention to what he did wrong. You're only paying attention to those things you want to see more of. And that's going to really increase his positive and adaptive behavior and reduce some of the power struggles that we can get in with kids when they're doing things that we don't want to see. So I'm going to talk a little bit about something that we call the coercive cycle. And this is something that we're really good at doing with our kids with ADHD. So here's a mom and her child. And the mom says, why aren't you cleaning up all these toys around your table? I told you this has to be cleaned up before Miss Tracy comes for music class. So mom's focusing on what this little kid did not do. She's telling her, you've got to clean up your toys. You didn't do it. You're not listening. And there's some exclamation marks. So mom's already feeling pretty frustrated. So Susie says back, it is clean. Okay, she's really upset. She's yelling now. Mom says, what? It looks horrible here. You need to pick up your toys. Susie then says, I can't do it myself. This is stupid. So she's getting more and more upset. Mom's getting more upset now too. She says, that's no excuse. And now she's screaming, you have to clean it up right now. Susie just starts bawling. She's crying, ah! And mom is probably so exhausted at this point. She says, fine, let's clean it up quick, but this is the last time. I always ask parents and kids who won here. And most people tell me that the kid won because she didn't have to clean up her toys. But actually, it's a trick question because both the child and the mother won. The child won because she didn't have to clean up her toys, but the mom also won because Susie stopped screaming. So this cycle creates something where the mom's behavior by doing it for the child is reinforcing the child's screaming, and the child's screaming is reinforcing mom for just doing the task for her. And so a lot of times our kids with ADHD start to think that they can't do things independently because as grown-ups, we come in and we start to do it for them because it feels like it's just easier to do it for them rather than getting into a fight with our kid and making them do a task. And you can see how this really can manifest in camp programs. This can manifest at home with a sitter because kids get so good at this, it becomes really automatic and we respond in hand to enhance that automatic sort of cycle. All right, so again, when we're doing active ignoring, we want to be really strategic. We want to actually think about what are the behaviors that I'm going to ignore. We want to start small and then get into more advanced behaviors. Again, it's going to be darkest before the dawn. So if you're doing it correctly, the behavior might get worse before it gets better because you probably paid attention to it at some point in time, or another adult or child probably paid attention to it at some point in time. The caveat I will say is that we never want to ignore aggressive or violent behavior because that's just not safe. And of course, as grown-ups, our number one task is to help kids stay safe. So, we can't ignore aggressive or violent behavior. These are really for mild attention-seeking behaviors. So things like complaining or whining, maybe some mildly inappropriate language, like some cursing or talking back, or something like throwing crayons or throwing a ball aggressively or saying, I hate you. Those are sorts of things that we can ignore. Instead of paying attention to these behaviors, we want to look for positive opposites. So while you're occupying yourself by ignoring your child, you could be thinking, okay, what is it that I want to see them do instead? A lot of times as grown-ups, we tell kids what not to do. We say, don't throw that ball at your sister, right? Okay, so instead of throwing the ball at your sister, what do we want to see Johnny do? We want to see Johnny put the ball down on the floor slowly. We want to see Johnny be gentle with his toys. So we want to look for those positive opposites, and that's going to help teach our kids with ADHD what to do instead of what not to do. Paying attention to these positive opposites is going to increase that behavior. And again, we're going to use our labeled praise skill when we see the positive opposites and make sure we apply that praise as soon as that positive opposite behavior happens. All right. Now we're going to talk about how to reward successes that kids have. We all really thrive on reward systems. A lot of times I hear parents say, I don't want to reward my kid. They already get enough things. They should be doing these things anyway, or rewards are for younger kids. But we all actually thrive on rewards. You know, if you think about your own lives, would you show up to work if you didn't get a paycheck? Probably not, right? So we all function really well with rewards, and rewards are really going to help our kids with ADHD follow rules, be more independent in their actions, follow directions the first time they're told, and increase self-responsibility. And we can use rewards in all sorts of different ways. So I have some examples up here, like coupons to a movie night, or extra screen time, or getting to choose what's for dinner, staying up late. Some kids are just motivated by having sticker charts or longer term rewards that they can earn. When we make rewards, we really want to think about something called the Premack principle, or Grandma's law. And so that means we're going to pair a low probability behavior, so something like doing homework or an activity that kids don't like to do, with a high probability behavior. So for example, if you do your homework, then you get screen time. Okay, we want to make sure that the child does that if behavior first before they get the screen time. So they're doing the desired behavior first, and then you provide the reward. Kids are often very, very good at negotiating these sorts of things, and we do not want to get back into a negotiation battle. So we want to make sure that our rewards are really clearly outlined for kids so that they know exactly what they need to do in order to get the reward. And part of why this is called Grandma's Law is because the classic example is, if you eat your vegetables, then you get dessert. So it's a first then. And here are some examples, you know, in the slides, of pictures of how you can set this up at home so that your child knows there's no negotiation, there's no talking about it. First, you have to put your toys away, then you get to play with bubbles. And you can think about how a YMCA program could do this pretty easily, right? If your kid really enjoys swimming and they really don't like gymnastics, well, maybe you can work with them so that they set up the schedule. So first they do gymnastics and then they get to go to swimming. But if they don't participate in gymnastics, they don't get to earn that swim time. And we really want to think about the rewards that motivate our kids as things that kids have to earn, not things that kids just get, because we need to use their motivation to help us get them involved, activated, and engaged in the activity. There's a lot of misconceptions about rewards. So one of the things I hear a lot is that rewards are bribing kids, okay? Rewards are not bribes, because bribes are typically given before a desired behavior. So I might say, if you eat your vegetables, then you get dessert, but I'll give some dessert first. Okay, that's not going to be effective, because then the child's just getting what they want and we're not seeing that desired behavior from them. We really want to think about rewards like a child's paycheck. Again, would you go to work for no money? And the answer, unless you're super altruistic, is probably no. So we need to pay it forward for kids. But once we put a reward system in place, we want to make sure that kids understand that nothing is free. All the fun activities like screen time or trips to the trampoline park, those are all things that kids should be sort of doing something in order to receive. I also hear from parents a lot that kids should be doing a task, so they shouldn't need a reward to do it. Okay. But again, kids receive lots of different sorts of rewards for behaving well. One of them is going to be our attention and our praise, but a lot of times we do have to monetize those rewards with points or sticker charts or different ways to show them that we're recognizing what they're doing. Putting a reward system in place, even if it's something that we feel like they should be doing, is going to help make sure that that behavior happens more frequently and more consistently. So if you feel like your child should already be doing this, but they're not, we need to meet the kid where they are, and we can slowly fade out the reward once we have the behavior happening more consistently. Parents also often think that rewards programs are really complicated and time-consuming, and they often shy away from them because of that. And it's certainly true that reward systems can take a lot of time and effort up front. But it's really worth the time and effort in the long run because they work so effectively for kids and they can be used in so many different settings. So even if it feels like a lot to ask your child's camp program to set up a reward system for them, it's going to make your child's life better, your life better, and the camp program's life better. So it's totally worth the time and investment. And a good reward system is one that is not overly complicated because then it's really hard for the child to follow. And it's also going to be hard for you and other adults in the child's life to follow. Lastly, when we think about rewards, we need to make sure that they match the developmental stage of the child. So we really want to think about Goldilocks when we make a reward system. It can't be too easy and it can't be too hard. It's got to be just right. Okay. And it's really important that kids weigh in on what those rewards are. A lot of times as grown-ups, we think something will be rewarding and it's just not. And it's not going to be a reward if it's not something that the child is willing to work for. So you want to enlist your child in thinking about what is it that they'd be motivated to work for. You want to have easy, medium, and hard tasks on your reward system, and those should match small, medium, and big rewards. And we want to think about where your child is developmentally with all of these things. If your child is not able to tie his or her shoe, then it's just not fair to say you only get screen time if you tie your shoe. But maybe your kid can do the last step of tying your shoe by pulling those bunny ears through the hole. And so maybe start with a reward there. Right? Or maybe your kid's not capable of participating in a 30-minute activity. But if they participate for 20 minutes, we can give a reward for that and slowly increase the reward for longer times of participation. We also can't have a reward system that is static and never changes because we want reward systems to help shape kids' behaviors more and more to what we want them to do. So we want to think about constantly changing the reward system. So as soon as they master an easy task, we replace that easy task with something a little more challenging so that the kid stays engaged and motivated and it doesn't become too easy for them to get rewards and then they don't really have to buy in because they're just getting those things anyway. If it's too easy, your kid's just going to get rewards but not really do what you want to see them do. And if it's too hard, your kid's not going to buy in because they're going to feel defeated up front. So it has to really be just right. And then harder tasks, of course, are going to be a greater point value. And you can get really creative with different reward systems. So for instance, maybe a kid gets a special amount of screen time for a good day at camp. But maybe if they have a good week at camp, they get to go take a friend to a movie. So you can have a small reward for daily tasks, and then you can have a big reward for consistency or more challenging things. And then when we think about scheduling, again, structure is going to be really important for our kids, and we really need to enlist them in setting up this structure because at first they're going to think, no, I don't want structure, I just want to have all my free time, right? So if we think about Johnny who's going to a YMCA camp, and there's not a lot of structure and there's not a great staffing ratio, we want to think about how can Johnny set up structure within that camp. So maybe he's checking in with a counselor a couple times per activity, or maybe he takes a self-regulatory break where he does a series of jumping jacks or push-ups every so often during an activity to get some of his energy out. We really want to work with our kids to enlist from them what's going to set them up for success over the summer. Even Susie, who's staying home with a sitter this summer, we might want to set up some academic time. We might want to set up some time for her to practice her violin or go to baseball practice or schedule some time to have play dates with friends. So we really want to create a schedule for kids every single day and help them see that scheduling is going to make things go more fun and more smoothly for them. We can do this while fostering independence by offering options. So Susie, you can either have a play date or go to the park. And we can also do this by decorating and designing schedules. So I have some examples on the slides of different schedules I've helped create with different kids. And we can have visuals and tearaways. I have lots of kids who like to cross off the activity once it's done, or pull off the Velcro once the activity is done. And they really take ownership and mastery over their schedules and see that it's super fun. Again, we want to use all these skills together to help our kids make a plan for the summer. And we can really anticipate situations that are high stress. So these might be things like transitioning, maybe transitioning to a new camp program, or out of school into the summer unstructured months, maybe going on vacation or spending a day with a friend, or a barbecue or a family party. So again, things that sound really fun for most parents and most kids, but for those parents and kids who have ADHD, knowing that this often evokes a lot of stress and could potentially be a time of a lot of shame where your kid might have a meltdown or have a really hard time holding it together. So when we make a plan for an activity, we really want to be thoughtful about what are those things that typically set our kid up for a time of difficulty. And we want to provide them with something fun to do. Maybe they bring a book, or they bring an activity that they really like to do. We also want to make sure we're not asking too much of them when they're tired or hungry. And we want to minimize people who might instigate or get in the way, or pay a lot of attention if our kid's struggling. We can set up a plan by making 2 to 3 really simple rules for your kid to follow. Again, we don't want to have a laundry list of things, because that's going to be really hard for our child with ADHD to keep in mind. So we might have 2 to 3 simple rules. So for a day at camp, we might say, I want you to keep your hands to yourself. I want you to look at your counselors when they speak to you. And I want to hear that you had a good day listening to all the directions at the program. Then you want your child to repeat the rules back to you so that you know that they understood them and they heard them. And then you're going to give them, again, that grandma's rule. If you follow the rules, then you get 30 minutes of screen time tonight. And again, it's got to be something that your child really wants and will be motivated by. If you don't follow the rules, then you're not going to have any screen time, and you're going to have to serve a timeout. Okay, so something really simple and clear that they understand. And then you want to practice. You want to make sure that you're practicing, and maybe you're practicing in sort of a low stress environment where you're not worried about the reactions of others. So you might even plan a practice activity. I often go to grocery stores with parents, or other settings that can be really boring, and set up a practice so that the kid knows what to expect and the parent knows exactly how to do it, so you're not reactive in a high stress moment. All right, and finally, move the slide here. Okay, when we set up discipline and consequences, we want to make sure, again, that we're praising and paying attention to the positive opposites. This seems like, how could that possibly be a discipline strategy? But it's actually our #1 behavior management tool to pay attention to the positives and really preempt the inappropriate behaviors that we don't want to see. We also want to make sure that the consequence is equal to the size of the problem and appropriate to your child's developmental stage. Oftentimes, when we react to these tough things that kids with ADHD do, we're feeling really, really stressed out, understandably, and we can over-punish the child in a way that's ineffective and is not a teachable moment. So we want to make sure that the punishment matches the crime, and we want to have the punishment or the consequence sort of in mind ahead of time so that we're really prepared and not reacting. And then we want to make sure that when we do impose a consequence, we're consistent. So this is consistent across settings, across caregivers, again, so that the child knows exactly what to expect and they know that we're totally going to follow through. All right, so to summarize, we want to make sure that we are providing labeled praise to catch kids being good. We want to use praise generously. Again, I challenge you to tally up. Are you providing praise in a 5-to-1 positive to negative ratio? We want to turn that light switch off as soon as we see mildly inappropriate behavior and make it easier to get attention for appropriate prosocial behaviors than unwanted inappropriate ones. We want to reward desired behavior and give kids credit for all the hard work that they're doing, while also remembering that nothing is free. So anything that your kid is getting that they're motivated to get, we want to make sure there's a reward and a task tied into that. And we want to schedule kids for success because we know that kids with ADHD thrive on structure and schedules. We want to pair less preferred activities with highly desired ones. And even if all the activities are fun, there's nothing too small or too silly to put on a schedule. We want to show that schedules are going to set our kids with ADHD up for success.
That was excellent, Sarah. Really very good. I learned a great deal there. We do have some questions, so I'd like to get to those. A couple of parents have asked about medication holidays within this whole plan that you created. Some of them actually feel they feel more comfortable giving their children medication holidays. I don't know, with all your experience, where you come down on that.
Yeah, so, medication holidays are something that you should absolutely talk to your prescriber about. And it's not, I'm not completely opposed to medication holidays, but you really want to be thoughtful about a medication holiday with your kid. So if you want your kid to sit down and be able to do homework, maybe that's not a day that they're taking a break from medication. Right? So maybe you have a plan with them that on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they're going to do academic work, and on Tuesday and Thursday, they'll take a break. So you want to think about, are you asking them to do something while they're on a medication holiday that they simply can't do? A lot of my kids will stop an extended release medication over the summer, and they'll just take a morning dose of meds. And then we really see a difference in what they're capable of doing in those afternoon hours. So again, you just want to be thoughtful about the expectation and also talk to your kid about how they feel. Some kids are going to feel like they do want a break from meds, but some kids are going to know that when they take that break, they just don't feel like themselves, or they're not as successful, and they might want to continue taking the meds. So we also want to make sure that when we think about things like medication holidays, we're not doing it because that's what we think the kid wants, but we're really making sure that we're doing it because it's sort of the best interest for our child, for our family, and also for their friends and for whatever activities it is that they're doing.
That's an excellent point. Do you allow, in this system, I would imagine, yes, you allow the child, the tween, to have input when it comes to the rewards?
Oh, absolutely. So what I would do when I set up any reward system is I would, as a parent, sit down and think about what are the easy, medium, and difficult things that I want to see out of my kid. An easy thing should be something that they're already doing that we're not really giving them credit for. A middle, medium thing might be something that they do sometimes, but not always. And a hard thing would be something that they rarely do and that they really need a lot of motivation to engage in. Similarly, an easy, medium, and small reward would be something easy might be something that they're already getting, right? So it might be 15 minutes of screen time a night. But, it's not going to work effectively if it's not something that to do. So I would actually sit down with a child and make a list of rewards and then try to figure out what that point value will be. And that point value should be changing over time.
A father asks, for parents who aren't naturally organized, naturally in quotes, what do you recommend to them on how to create a structured summer program for their child? It seems like it would be hard for the parent to do if they're used to doing things on the fly. Are there any books, YouTube videos, or webinars other than this one they can watch to help them?
Yeah, so there is a system called organizational skills training that is really a structured approach to helping set up kids for success. But you could do something really simple where you just look at a planner or a calendar and you write out every hour of the kid's day, right? So maybe they wake up at 7 a.m. and you write from 7 to 8 a.m. you have one activity scheduled. From 8 to 9 you have something scheduled. And even if a parent who's not naturally organized. This is going to be harder to do, right? But this is one of the ways that we have to tailor our parenting approach to help kids be successful. And you can really use that sort of lack of natural organizational skills as a way to connect with your child and say, you know, this is not something that comes naturally or is easy to me either, but this is really something that is effective and helps me make sure I get everything done. I take care of my responsibilities, and then I have way more time to have fun because I've gotten all my tasks taken care of in advance.
Mm-hmm. This is a tough question. This mom's son, the only reward he wants is more video games, and she has banned them from the house. So how would she possibly talk her way, negotiate something here? I don't know.
Well, you know, again, you know, video games are going to be really based on the parent. So if she's willing to think about maybe finding a middle ground in video games, maybe there's some games that are just totally off limits, but there are some that are appropriate. You know, I think it's really hard to say no to any video games or screen times. And that's something that kids are really, really motivated by. But you could give them rewards in 15-minute increments, which is a pretty small amount, right? I typically say no more than an hour during the week and no more than 2 hours over the weekend. But if you break that down into 15-minute increments, that means they probably have to do 4 different behaviors or chores in order to get a whole hour of screen time. And you can set parameters. You can say no screen time after 8 p.m. or no violent video games, right? So you can totally take control over what it is that they have access to. But if it's something that your child's highly motivated to earn, then, you know, that's really something that you can use as a really powerful tool to get them to do a lot of the things that you want to see more of.
In terms of, as a parent, learning to ignore bad behavior when it's been perhaps a reflex for X number of months, is there something, sort of a little education for parents about how to do this? I mean, or do you just sort of ease your way into it and make mistakes along the way?
I think it's one of the hardest strategies that a parent can use. So what I would really recommend is thinking about maybe 2 behaviors that you want to stop ignoring. So for instance, maybe your child interrupts during dinner time and it really drives you crazy. So maybe you and your partner decide during dinner time, when our child interrupts our conversation, we're just going to ignore that one behavior. So you're figuring out a somewhat isolated time when you can practice your ignoring skill. And your kid's going to really notice. Your kid might even say, "Why are you ignoring me?" When kids say, "Why are you ignoring me?" that is one of my favorite moments because it shows me that it's working. And then you just want to make sure that you really commit to that. So I wouldn't start with a whole kit and caboodle up front. I'd pick a few select behaviors that you're going to ignore and then make sure you follow through with those. Because if you don't follow through, it's going to actually maintain the behavior even more. So once you decide to ignore it, follow through is absolutely important.
You talked about some weaknesses in summer camp programs in terms of the structure thesis that you put forward. What a lot of parents, though, do send their children to day camps, sometimes stay away camps. Are there some things they should be looking for that would be in agreement with that would enhance the plan you've laid out here? I mean,
so again, I would look into what allows your kid to be successful most of the time. If your kid is on a really comprehensive IEP plan and they need a lot of support and structure, and there's a really big camper to staff member ratio at the program that they're going to, that might not set them up for the most success. But if you know that there's a small staff to child ratio, that staff receive training in mental health, then that might be a better fit for your child. So you really want to take your good knowledge of your kid, parents know their kids best, and think about what are the settings where they do really well and how could we mimic their IEP in a camp setting? What experience or what sorts of training training does the staff get? And make sure that you tell the staff up front. A lot of parents are worried about telling staff members that their kid has a diagnosis or the specific strategies that they use because they're worried that maybe the kid won't be accepted in the camp. But if that's really the case, then your child's probably not going to do very well in that setting anyway. So you want to really be upfront with the people who are going to be taking care of your kid so that they can foster an environment that's going to be supportive and successful. Because having a kid have a tough summer, is just really going to take a big hit to their self-esteem and not something that we want them to do over the summertime.
Mm-hmm. Well, that'll have to be the last question. We're approaching 2 o'clock here. That was terrific. Thank you
Excellent.
so much.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here, Sarah. Appreciate it. We all learned a lot today.
Thank you.
And for everyone who attended, thank you for being here. And join us for our next webinar on June 1st, Diagnosing and Treating Comorbid Conditions in Children with expert Mark Burton. See you then, and have a good day, everyone.